Jaron Cale stepped off the hovertram with a grin that had seen better days, adjusting the strap of his bag so that it didn't slip while he weaved through the chaos of the Lyra VII spaceport. The air was thick with the scent of ionized metal, fried protein cubes, and something vaguely fruity that made his stomach churn, though he convinced himself it was part of the charm of interstellar markets. He passed a trio of robotic merchants bickering over whose stall emitted more enticing holographic lights, and he almost laughed when one of them tripped on a loose power conduit, launching a stack of neon fruit into zero gravity. Smooth, he muttered to himself, catching a glowing orange sphere before it smacked him in the face. I could really use a manual for this planet. Jaron had spent 10 years hiding here, perfecting a reputation as a small-time smuggler and fixer of minor catastrophes. Nobody suspected he'd once been a decorated officer of the Terran Alliance, or that a single incident, shrouded in bureaucratic secrecy and personal failure, had forced him to vanish into the stars. To the inhabitants of Lyra VII, he was just another human with an unfortunate sense of humor and a talent for getting out of situations that were obviously someone else's fault. He liked it that way. Life was simpler when people believed you were only clever enough to survive, not clever enough to be dangerous. He ducked into a narrow alleyway, dodging a hovering crate that emitted a nervous beeping noise like it had just discovered its own mortality. The shipment of anti-gravity orchids in his bag swayed precariously, their bioluminescent petals pulsating softly. "Don't wobble on me now," he whispered, patting the bag like it was a temperamental cat. "We both know the customs bots won't blink at my charm, but I'd rather not explain why these flowers are illegal. Again." He gave a dry chuckle, though the sound echoed oddly in the enclosed space and made him flinch. A sudden voice cut through the hum of machinery and chatter, smooth and sharp, yet lined with amusement. "You're far too careful for someone carrying plant drama." Jaron froze, eyes narrowing as he turned toward the source. There she stood, tall, elegant, and somehow entirely impossible. At first glance, she looked human, sharp green eyes, a confident stance, lips curved in the faintest smirk. But the ears. He caught the sweep of them out of the corner of his vision, long and curved like sails catching some invisible wind. He had heard of her, Vellyra, the queen of Zephyros, who ruled with wit, influence, and a reputation for unerring perception. But he never thought he would meet her in a dimly lit alley negotiating plant contraband. "I beg your pardon," he said, forcing casual as he tucked the bag behind him. "You mean these rebellious flowers?" Vellyra's laugh was soft, almost musical, but it carried a weight that made Jaron stand a little taller. "Rebellious is polite. I've seen them sprout in zero gravity and mock entire shuttle crews before breakfast. You're taking them seriously." He raised a brow. "And here I thought they were just ornaments for depressed robots. You know, something to brighten the mood while they short-circuit." He chuckled at his own joke, but the queen's gaze didn't waver. Instead, it sharpened, scanning the insignia faintly embossed on his inner sleeve, a mark so small that he'd never expected anyone to notice. Not like she could unless she already knew. And of course she did. "You didn't come here to sell orchids, human," she said, tilting her head with that unnerving precision that made him want to both run and confess simultaneously. "You've been hiding. I can see it in your gait, the slight hesitation in your smile, the way you try to charm the universe without leaving a trace. But it's useless. I see through it." Jaron swallowed. "I prefer practicing social invisibility, Your Highness. Works better if no one's around to judge." He tried a light tone, the way he always did when the tension got too heavy, but Vellyra only let a faint smile slip, one that didn't fully soften the weight of her words. "You're not clever enough to hide from me, but clever enough to amuse me," she said. "That counts for something." She stepped closer, her elongated ears twitching ever so slightly, betraying interest or maybe mild irritation. "I could have you arrested, or worse, stranded in the void. Instead, I want to see how long you can keep up the act." Jaron let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Humor had always been his shield, but suddenly it felt both flimsy and necessary. "I promise I can be witty under duress," he quipped, though his stomach churned. "It's a special talent of mine, highly overrated, apparently." Vellyra's laughter filled the alley, light but precise, echoing off the metal walls. "Overrated? Perhaps, but entertaining. And you will need entertainment where you're going, human. The stars are not kind even to those who hide from them." And with that, she turned and floated toward the hovertram that waited silently, as if it had been hers all along. Jaron followed, tugging the bag of glowing orchids behind him, every step a reminder that the game had changed. The Queen knew who he was. The universe he had carefully concealed himself within had just become a stage, and he had no idea what role he was supposed to play. Yet, despite the dread pooling in his stomach, he found himself muttering under his breath, "Well, at least she has a sense of humor." It was a fragile thought, a dangerous hope, and for now it was enough. Jaren stepped onto the crystalline surface of Zephyros like a man walking on thin glass, though he was careful to keep his voice light, as if humor could mask the shiver running down his spine. The palace hummed with energy, walls shifting subtly like liquid metal, reflecting and refracting the soft glow of the orbiting nebula beyond. Velira glided ahead, her long ears catching stray light, a silent announcement of her presence. Every step she took seemed effortless, her gait teasing gravity itself, and Jaren felt the absurd urge to apologize to the floor for being human. "So," she said, swiveling her head with a tilt that was both curious and calculating, "do humans always carry illegal flowers, or is this a special occasion?" Jaren swallowed, letting a grin slide across his face. "Special occasion," he said, "though I suppose from your perspective everything a human does is some level of illegal." He gestured to the orchids, which pulsed like living lanterns in his bag. "They're just mood enhancers. I hear they cheer up depressed robots, maybe even upset a few bored queens." Velira laughed, a sound like wind through crystalline chimes. "Mood enhancers, huh? If that's true, I might consider hiring you for court entertainment. Your jokes are tolerable." She paused, tilting her head. "Though I suspect you think they're funnier than they really are." "Guilty," Jaren admitted, letting the weight of the truth hang lightly, though his heart was hammering beneath the calm veneer. "I also overestimate my audience sometimes. It's a human flaw, right up there with forgetting birthdays and misjudging alien politics." They moved through corridors that twisted in impossible geometries, each bend and fold of space reflecting a different angle of the nebula outside, casting kaleidoscopic patterns over Jaren's face. He tripped once over what seemed to be a floor tile that wasn't, and Velira didn't bother hiding her smirk. "You're supposed to appear confident," she said, her voice teasing but precise. "Not as if you just walked into a wormhole unprepared." Jaren straightened, brushing imaginary dust off his jacket. "Confidence is a flexible concept," he replied. "Some days it bends toward charm, other days toward chaos. Today, I think it's mostly chaos." The Queen allowed him that one small victory and led him into a garden suspended in midair. Flowers hovered, spinning slowly, their petals responding to thought and emotion, glowing brighter when they detected amusement. Jaren raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me these are sentient?" "In a manner of speaking," Velira said, leaning slightly so that the light caught the curve of her ears. "They gossip, they judge. I've had flowers complain about court fashion choices. One tried to unionize last week." Jaren chuckled, letting the tension ease, if only momentarily. "Unionized flowers? I thought I had seen it all in the galaxy. Guess not." Velira's gaze sharpened as she observed him. "Do you find humor in everything human?" she asked. "Or just where it keeps you alive?" "Mostly survival," Jaren admitted. "Though I admit, laughing at danger is cheaper than therapy and twice as effective." They reached an observatory where stars hung like living constellations, shimmering with patterns that shifted according to recent events in the universe. Velira gestured toward them. "Every point of light tells a story," she said. "Some are tragedies, some are comedies. Some are so absurd I can't help laughing at them, even when civilizations burn." Jaren tried to match her calm. "So we're cosmic spectators, then. Watching stars argue like toddlers with too much energy." Velira laughed softly, and he realized the sound was lighter than the gravity in his chest had been a moment ago. "Exactly," she said, "though some stories require intervention. Some like yours demand honesty. Tell me, Jaren Kale, or should I say the Fixer, why do you hide?" Jaren's throat tightened. He forced himself to smile. "Mostly because I'm very good at hiding, or at least I like to pretend I am. And because, well, revealing it might make you think I'm less charming than I am." Velira tilted her head, ears twitching. "Charm is a human concept, isn't it? I see cleverness, caution, and guilt all tangled together. You're not hiding from me, you're hiding from yourself." Jaren blinked, caught off guard. "Hiding from myself, that's a new one. I've been using sarcasm and bad jokes for 10 years to avoid that particular truth. And apparently it's not working." "You amuse me," Velira said, stepping closer. "But I want to see if your wit can survive transparency. The universe has a way of exposing people human. You've dodged it so far. That luck won't last forever. He swallowed, the orchids in his bag pulsing brighter as if sensing the tension, and forced a laugh. Then I guess I'll just have to get better at being honest while making terrible jokes. Consider it my new survival strategy. Valira let him hold onto that small illusion for now, her eyes softening slightly but never leaving his. For now, she said. But remember, Jaren, some truths have gravity all their own. They can't be joked away, and yet, she gave him a faint, knowing smile. Some humor can make facing them a little less painful, even for someone as human as you. And as they walked further into the garden of hovering flowers, with light bending in impossible ways and the stars outside whispering secrets, Jaren realized he had stepped onto a path where laughter and danger were inseparable, and where the alien queen with long ears had already claimed the role of both judge and unexpected companion. Jaren Kale crouched behind a shifting wall of holographic panels, the floor beneath him trembling as plasma blasts lit up the corridors of Zephyros. The palace, normally a haven of calculated elegance, had become a chaotic labyrinth, alarms ringing and warning lights turning every reflective surface into a strobe of danger. The rebel faction, a coalition of alien dissidents who had long resented Valira's rule and the subtle influence of humans, had launched a sudden, violent strike. Jaren's bag of anti-gravity orchids had been hastily stashed in a safe compartment, forgotten for the moment, though he wondered if they were quietly judging him for abandoning them. Valira appeared at the bend of a corridor, sliding past a volley of energy bolts with a grace that made Jaren's knees ache in admiration. "Try to keep up, human," she called, a grin tugging at her lips even as sparks danced dangerously close. "And do remember, heroics are more convincing when they come with a sense of humor." Jaren snorted. "Ah, yes, because nothing says I'm competent like cracking jokes while the universe tries to vaporize you." He vaulted over a low-energy field that buzzed with static, landing just behind her. "Also, I have a new theory. Rebels never consider the morale boost of sarcastic commentary. It's their critical flaw." She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Instead, she led him through a side passage that defied spatial logic, corridors folding back on themselves, walls flickering between solid and translucent. Jaren followed, muttering quips about feeling like a particularly anxious particle in a quantum experiment. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because of gravity, which barely existed in the palace, but because of the stakes. He realized the humor he relied on was no longer just a shield, it had become a bridge. With every sarcastic remark, every joke aimed at both rebels and himself, he maintained focus, kept his mind sharp, and stayed tethered to Valira in the chaos. They arrived at the central control hub, where the rebels had nearly overrun the defense systems. Jaren's hands moved automatically, rerouting power through improvised circuits, engaging defense drones that had been dormant for decades. "I hope you like bad wiring, Your Highness," he said, sweat and sparks flying alike. "Because I'm about to improvise a very ugly symphony of defense protocols." Valira's ears twitched in amusement. "I like ugly symphonies," she replied, her green eyes glinting with approval. "Especially when they come with human ingenuity and terrible jokes." As the last wave of attackers faltered, caught in a field of redirected energy beams, Jaren allowed himself a grin. The rebellion's assault was over, the palace secure, and yet he didn't feel the relief he expected. Instead, he noticed a subtle change in himself. The fear that had accompanied his humor for so long had lessened. He had been forced to confront danger head-on, to trust another being entirely, and to accept that hiding his past was no longer an option. He looked at Valira, and for the first time he saw not just a queen who could unmask him with a glance, but a partner who could challenge and trust him simultaneously. Valira walked to the console, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. "You performed remarkably, Jaren. I admit, I doubted the efficacy of sarcasm in combat situations. But you've proven that it can, in fact, be lethal to morale, if not to the enemy." He raised an eyebrow. "I'll take lethal morale, less messy than explosives and better for flowers." He gestured vaguely toward the hidden orchids, imagining them glowing proudly from their compartment. "Your humor has survived worse than this," she said, her voice softening. "And so have you. I see now that it's not just a shield. It's a tool, a way to navigate the galaxy with eyes open, and perhaps," her smile deepened, "a way to navigate trust, which is far more dangerous than plasma blasts." Jaren allowed himself a rare moment of stillness. Trust, he said quietly. I never thought I'd be good at it, or maybe I never thought I'd have someone worth trusting. Valira's laughter, soft and musical, echoed through the hub. Flattery will not save you if I ever doubt you, human. But it is noted. She extended a hand, not in command, but in partnership, and he took it, the connection grounding him in a way he hadn't expected. By the time the rebels had retreated and the palace returned to its usual rhythm, Jaren found himself sitting in one of the floating observation pods, the nebula beyond twinkling with a serenity that contrasted sharply with the day's chaos. He held the bag of orchids in his lap, letting their gentle glow illuminate his face. He realized he no longer felt the weight of hiding his identity. The human he had buried beneath jokes, charm, and careful secrecy had grown, tempered by challenge, humor, and the quiet insistence of someone who could see him entirely. Valira joined him, settling into a space beside him without speaking, her ears brushing the edges of the pod. For the first time, the silence was comfortable, not filled with suspicion or unspoken questions. Jaren cracked a small joke about the orchids starting a union in protest of the palace's temperature controls, and Valira laughed, a sound that filled the void between stars. The galaxy was still vast, still dangerous, still full of secrets. But for the first time, Jaren Kale did not fear being exposed. He had faced the truth, confronted the chaos, and survived with humor intact. He had learned that hiding was no longer necessary when someone could see him fully and still choose connection over judgment. He glanced at Valira, and her gaze met his, a shared understanding passing between them. They would face whatever came next together, whether battles, politics, or cosmic absurdities, armed with trust, wit, and a stubborn defiance that neither stars nor rebels could erase. Jaren let out a deep breath, letting the tension dissolve completely, and muttered with a grin, "Well, I guess we're officially partners in crime and comedy, for the galaxy or at least this palace." Valira's smirk widened, her long ears twitching in amusement. "Partners, then, and perhaps more, but do try not to embarrass the orchids, they take their roles very seriously." And as they sat there, surrounded by floating light and the silent whispers of distant stars, Jaren understood something profound. The journey had ended, but he had emerged more human, more courageous, and more alive than he had ever allowed himself to be. The past was no longer a chain, the future no longer a threat, and for the first time he laughed freely. Not to hide, not to survive, but simply because the universe, with all its absurdities and wonders, was finally his to navigate.